Yeah.
If anybody would like to have, there's plenty of seats if you'd like to sit down. Okay? Good afternoon. Welcome to my bank. I am Charles Maynard. And I'm doing something that I would never do. I'm working on something. But, let me start. I came to Portland when I was 8 years old. My father and mother, Gardner and Parnell Maynard, well, we purchased 200 acres north of Portland. After a while, it became 400 acres. And it was in the wilderness, so it was a lot of work to get it ready for planting and harvesting and that type of thing. And I worked the farm, even when I was working with the bank. After I finished my schooling, though, I was working the farm, and I got my business education through mail order catalogs. Anything I could get that was mail order and in business area, that's what I learned my business sense out of. When I was 22 years old, I married Frances Churchill. Her father was William Churchill, who was Portland's first merchant, who owned a store on this very spot. And that was 2 years, though, after Frances and I were married. That we came. Frances and I had 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. Our sons died in childhood, but our daughter, Helen, who was our firstborn, lived to become the wife of E.D. Woodbury, another merchant in the village. Does the Woodbury come to mind for anybody? Like there's a little city outside of Lake Odessa called Woodbury. Now, in 1874, a distant relative of mine, Captain Ethel Allen. The reason why he's a distant relative is that his mother's name was Nancy J. Maynard. Jane. And he was a graduate of Marion Collegiate Institute. He served in the Civil War in the 98 New York Infantry in the GAR. Anybody know what GAR stands for? Grand Army of the Republic. So he fought for the North, and he left the service as a captain. And he came to Portland in 1874 with his brother-in-law, J.B. Rowe. J.B. Rowe came to Portland to help start a bank. And he operated the grain business for the bank. He moved to Detroit, and he became a grain buyer. Then he came back to Portland, and he married Ethel Allen's sister. So now we're all kind of interconnected here. The 3 of us founded our bank in 1874, and then I was in the banking business for 46 years. And I was still at the helm at 90 years of age. In 1878, following the Great Kent Street Fire, we replaced our 1-story wooden building with a 2-story brick building. Now, across the street, you'll see Weber State Savings Bank. They were our competitors. John Weber was staked by his father, Lorenzo Weber, to start a private bank, and they started their bank in 1870. And I was still in the mercantile business with my first door. Now, the Webbers continued to run their bank until 1929. But during the 1890s, our families built our mansions up on the hill. And they're still there today. Mine was built on Bridge Street. It's a red brick Queen Anne house. Weber built theirs on James Street, which is between Warren.
Thank you, whoever brought this water. I appreciate it. Sit down, Kathy, right over here by James. We have.
And so pharmacists would get their training from doctors often, and then they would serve apprenticeships under other pharmacists. They would be called, the apprentices would be the clerks in the pharmacy, and the pharmacist would be the person who had the most education at that time, and he would be training the other pharmacists. As I said, I'm sure it had an influence on my father, but it had a big influence on me, and that's one of the reasons why I became a physician. Dad landed in Portland in 1873 with 75 cents in his pocket. At that time, he was working as a traveling drug salesman. We would call them drug reps. And he was working for a company out of Cincinnati, Ohio. He came to Portland expecting to receive pay, and nothing came because the company had some kind of a financial disaster and wasn't able to send him any money. So here he is in Portland with 75 cents in his pocket, and he immediately needs to find work. And of course, the work that he found was as a clerk in a pharmacy. I don't know if it was his intention to make Portland his home for the next 43 years, but that's exactly what happened. My mother was very private, and I don't know much about her. But I do know that she was born in Unadilla, which is in Livingston County, in 1853, and that her first job was as a milliner. Milliners made hats. I like to think that my mother and dad met when Dad was on one of his sales trips. They were married in 1873. Oh. My last guy held it up for me.
I will do that. I will do that.
That's what I like to think, that they met there, and that Dad came when he came to Portland, and he kind of got, I think, stuck here. Mother stayed in Fowlerville until he was able to get established and send for her. And I was born in 1875 in Fowlerville. Well, back to Portland. As I said, Dad had 75 cents in his pocket, so he needed to find employment. And the first place he worked was at Josiah Dilley's store, which is down the street from here. And when Mr. Dilley sold, he went to work for Frank Webster, and later he worked for Mr. Lee, and then he went to work for Mr. Bogue, whose store was on Bridge Street over there where McClellan's is. And then he worked for Mr. Lee when he bought Will Elder's store. My mother and father were both very frugal, and eventually were able to buy this pharmacy and open it. They were also able to buy many other parcels of land around Portland. Not only was Dad very frugal, but he was also good at advertising. And one of the things he did was he bought 10-cent cigars and sold them for 5 cents. And he didn't mind losing the 5 cents on each cigar because people would come in for the cheap cigars and then buy other products. So, you know, nothing's new in this world. Silas Pilkington built this building and operated it as a general store before Father bought it. Mom and Dad operated this store, and they opened it. They leased it first from Silas in 1893, and then they bought it in 1895. Well, by this time, I graduated from Portland High School. I graduated in 1892, and then I attended Northwestern, which is in Illinois. So I never really worked in this store unless I came home and worked here on break. But I followed my father around and learned a lot about drugs when he was working for other pharmacies. I don't know if they would have decided to retire in 1916 or not if it hadn't been for a harrowing experience they had here. They had an upstairs apartment, which was very common for pharmacists because the pharmacies were open 7 days a week, often operated for 12 to 14, maybe even 15 hours a day. So they put in long hours, so they would have an apartment upstairs. Well, it was February of 1916. There was a blizzard outside. It was the first week of February. They were asleep in their upstairs apartment when they smelled smoke. At that time, the telephone company was also operating out of the pharmacy. And Charles North, the operator, and his wife were asleep on a cot next to the switchboard. They also smelled smoke. And Charles tried to set off the alarm, but of course it didn't work. So Dad ran out to the street and rang the town alarm. As I said, it's a blizzard. So Chief Hickson, who, by the way, had a jewelry store next door, he got the equipment together, but because of the storm, it wasn't easy, and because of the delay in setting off the alarm, by the time they got here, the fire was fully engulfed, the building was fully engulfed. Plus, they were shooting water on the fire, and it was freezing. So the next morning, everything inside was covered with a sheet of ice. All the drugs, all the furnishings, everything. My parents escaped with the clothes on their back. So Dad walked around town in borrowed clothes that day. But by Tuesday night, he had fully replaced his wardrobe, and so had my mother. Fortunately, as I said, Dad owned a lot of property around town, so he didn't have any problem finding a new residence, and they took up residence in an apartment above the bakery. The telephone company was already shipping new equipment here because they didn't want their customers to be without service. And by Thursday of that week, the telephone was up and running. As I said, I was living and working in Muskegon at that time, and I had a successful medical practice. But I rushed to Portland as soon as I heard about the fire, and I began encouraging Dad to retire. I mean, they were putting in long hours, and they were getting up in age. So Dad thought about it, and then he decided he wanted to rebuild, but he would lease. So he found another person to operate the store. He leased it to Carl Bywater and Leo C. Ryerson. And by June, the pharmacy was open again as Bywater's. Mother and Dad moved to Muskegon to be near me. My mother died in 1927, and my dad died in 1934. He had just bought me a brand new car, and we were out for a ride, and he had a stroke and died. But Dad still had business interests here in Portland, so he made many trips back to Portland. And in 1927, I think it is, he struck a deal with the city of Portland, and he sold 2.5 parcels of land in what you might know as Powers Playground. He sold it to them for $1. That's the end of my parents' story, but I also have a story to tell. I mean, I was a female doctor in 1900. And if you would like to hear about my story, you can come to the Portland Historical Society meeting on Thursday, November 24th at 6:30 and hear, as they say, the rest of the story. So, thank you for coming.
Well, thank you everyone for coming and visiting me at my hardware store here. My name's Duncan Kennedy. I'm a little loud. And I was actually born in Ontario, Canada in the year 1846. My parents were Scottish. They came over at a very young age to Canada. And the rest of my family stayed in Canada, but I decided to come over here to Michigan, into Portland. And I started off as a blacksmith. When I was 14 years old, I started apprenticing, and about 1872, I actually opened the first blacksmith shop here in Portland. And I ran that for until 1885 to the age of 39. Then I decided to go into the hardware business. And that's when we got this, purchased this building right here. And I did that until I retired at the age of 70. And actually, I'm 69 right now. I'm just in the future there. But I'm thinking about retiring next year. I got these guys, Carl Derby and Bill Stokum. They're bugging me about buying the place. So I might retire next year and sell it to these guys. We'll see what happens. Now, I had a family here. I was married to my wife, Edie, and we also had one adopted daughter named Edith. And we were married in 1870. And now, I'll talk about my wife later. My daughter, she was a good kid, but she just had one small thing she did that, she ran off and married some kind of questionable sales guy. But unfortunately she got over him and then eventually married a gentleman named Louis, and they stayed married the rest of it. So that worked out a little better later on. Now, I was also very involved in the community as far as politics. I was a Democrat and very involved in the Democratic Party at that time, very active. And I was the village president from 1875 to 1876. And then I served on the village council after that for 16 years. Once again becoming the president again for another 4 years. Not only that, I was the Portland Township Highway Commissioner. I was very active in all levels. I was a Mason and a Knights Templar. Now my wife, Edie, was quite a woman. She was a great singer. She led the Methodist choir. She sang at all kinds of activities, including funerals, weddings, whatever you wanted her to sing, she'd be there singing. She was also president of the Women's Relief Corps, very active at the state level in that organization. She was the president of the Ladies Literary Society, and also president of the Ladies Aid Society of the Methodist Church. So we were both very involved in the community at that time. Now, we did have one tragedy back in 1906. This building actually caught on fire. Started up in the second floor. We used to have a tinsmith area up there. There was a lot of oil involved, and that caught fire and really destroyed quite a bit of the building and most of my wares at that time. And unfortunately, I was a little underinsured, so that was a real problem. This building at that time was worth $4,000. Yeah, and I was insured for 2, so that wasn't a real good situation. I had about $14,000 worth of stock in here during the time of the fire, and I was only insured for $8,700. So it was a real blow to us at that time, but we were able to make a comeback after that. Now, moving to the present time, if you were to walk down the hallway that goes towards the restrooms there and look at the left, at the end of the hallway, there's a place where the bricks have kind of fallen away, and behind that you can see a very blackened beam, and that's kind of leftover evidence of the fire that was in this building at that time. So I eventually did sell to Carl Derby and Bill Stokum and retired at the age of 70. So I just wanted to come back and talk to you guys today, and hope you enjoy I don't know if you have any questions. Yeah. Ooh, yes. The ghost has a question.
How many Democrats were here in Portland?
I have no idea, but I was one of them. There must have been quite a few because they elected me village president, right? Yes.
What other things were in this building?
Well, believe it believe it or not, we actually had a movie theater in this building. And I don't know, Walt, did you ever watch a movie in here? Do you remember? I don't know when. I'm not exactly sure what years that was. It must have been after. But starting from this, where I'm standing right here, in the basement underneath, there's not much of a basement, but down below this floor here, there's another floor that angles down from this point about 4 feet lower, and that was the theater floor at that time. It was a movie theater. So it must have been very early, maybe probably in the silent movie era. So we have evidence of that down in the basement. So, and after that, it was before we got it. It was back. It was an antique store. That actually, this entire building was full of antiques, and actually, and the upstairs was full, and it went up over top of the bar next door. It was all an antique shops. That was before I actually came to town here. And I heard tell that there was a grocery store in here at one time, and what's that? Trying to help me out. It was Lear's grocery store? Okay. Okay, cool.
Was there a fire department here at one point?
Well, there was. I was I in the fire department? I think I was.
No, you got it from the guy.
who built the building was.
Oh, okay. I forgot about that guy, but that's so long ago. You know, I'm both ready to retire. I can't remember all that stuff in the beginning. Okay. So that's about what I have today. If you guys want to see the burned cinders and down the hall there, and you can put your finger in there and you know, get some chalk in your finger in that initial wall if you want. I guess that'd be cool.
So you didn't like John Patrick? He was one of my customers.
Yeah. I don't want to say anything bad about Barry at this point.
We hear that fire department had really razzle-dazzle uniforms.
They did, yes. And I thought I might have one today, but they had like this cool like hats like this with a big symbol on the front, and I think they were blue, weren't they?
What was their name? Wabana.
Right, they were the Wabana because they were named after the river that is now Looking Glass. There you go.
Why was that? Because there was a pump down there?
You're asking me some hard questions. I think I sold those guys that pump in my hardware store.
You probably did.
Yeah, I'm sure you did. 'Cause I had farm implements. I had everything you could possibly want to run a farm or run a business out of in here in my hardware stores. And if we didn't have it, we could in our tinsmith, we could build it for you. We could fashion it.
How did the fire start in this building, you know?
Oil. Too much oil. I'm not sure if they were cinders or whatever, but it started in the second floor towards the back, and then the fire department really had a struggle to try to keep it from spreading to the other buildings, but they were able to contain it after quite a struggle.
Well, thank you, Mr. Cannon.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah, you got better. You got better every time you did it. You should get your facts straight.
But
And in order.
look, it was back at you, Bob. I know.
Good job.
I didn't know there was
No, you did very well. You did very well.
Oh my goodness, you're really serious about this.
Sorry. I didn't realize it was.
Good. You want to try doing that?
And I'm going to try to do this without the microphone. If you cannot hear me, please raise your hand and I will use the microphone. Okay? Depends how loud the traffic is. Hear me? All right. Okay. Welcome to 128 Kent Street, the Smith and Dellenbaugh block. I'm Jenny Dellenbaugh, the second oldest child of Dr. Charles and Mary Hill Dellenbaugh. The time period today is October 1970, and I'm 52 years old. We're here today to talk about my father's building and his life, as well as my story and some of the changes in Portland. First, a bit of background about Portland.
The first white settlers arrived in this area around 1833, and the name Portland was selected in 1836. The village was laid out in 1837, but no plats were recorded until 1846, and it wasn't incorporated as a village until 1869. At that time, the population here was about 1,060. The Civil War had ended only 3 years before. The streets were unpaved and in most cases ungraded, and there were very few sidewalks. Water came from wells, either privately owned or on street corners for public use, which it would have even been like the town pump down on the corner. Also in 1869, the wood-burning Detroit and Milwaukee Railroad steam locomotive arrived in late autumn, and that led to new growth in Portland. And now our story. My father, Dr. Charles Christian Dellenbaugh, was born in 1834 in Morristown, Ohio. His father, my grandfather, Dr. Samuel Dellenbaugh, was a native of Switzerland and a prominent surgeon, and the family soon relocated to Buffalo, New York. When my father also chose the medical profession, he attended University of Michigan for 2 years and then attended Buffalo, New York Medical School, where he graduated as a doctor of medicine and surgery in 1860. He remained in New York until 1863 when he moved to Detroit, and a few months later, at age 29, he started a medical practice in the village of Westphalia, and he served in that community for 13 years. He met and married my mother, Mary Hill of Portland. My sister Helen was born first. I was born in 1867, followed by 5 more children. In 1876, when I was 9, we moved to the village of Portland, where our mother's family resided. Our beautiful home still exists on the corner of Pleasant Street and Grand River Avenue, then known as DeWitt Street. There's a picture of it. It's now an apartment building. We also owned a pasture where we kept a cow and our horse for Father's house calls buggy. Our pasture was then known as the Grove, and it had many gatherings, people walking up to it, and there's a picture down here of people walking to the Grove. The Grove is now called Alton Park, and it is across from St. Pat's. Father had an office in downtown Portland. During the Great Fire on Kent Street in November 1877, several businesses and wooden buildings were destroyed. This led to a change in the village charter for all new buildings to be made of brick. And in 1879 and 1880, approximately 18 new brick block buildings were constructed on the 2 sides of Kent Street. My father and Laban Atwater Smith already owned a cider mill across the Looking Glass River next to the Ypsilanti Reed factory. In 1880, they built this 2-story, 7-bay, 2-storefront red brick Italiante commercial building. It was called the Smith and Dellenbaugh block. We owned the south end of the building. Downstairs, Willis M. Elder was the initial occupant of Elder's Drugs, and my father's medical office was upstairs on the left next to the new Opera House. So the door to get up to the upstairs offices was right there, and so you'd go up that, and so my father's office was right up here, next to where this door is. Also upstairs was a dressmaker, the offices of Josiah Dilley, Dr. Rist, who was a surgeon and a dentist, and W.M. Howard, attorney. Around 1900, the store downstairs became Sulpizio's fruit, candy, and ice cream shop, better known as Fonzie's. That was the nickname of the owner, Alfonso Sulpizio, and his wife, Marietta. They began living upstairs with their 3 children across from my father's office. One of the stories that we never tired of hearing was my father's interaction with John Wilkes Booth. My father was still working in Buffalo and attended the theater one night and saw Booth, who was an actor, in The Iron Mask. After the play, Booth ended up at the same cafe, grabbed my father by the collar and hauled him toward the bar, insisting on buying him something to drink. Booth became drunk, loud, and threatening. He left the bar, walked across the avenue to a storefront that had a display of Confederate relics. With a heavy bottle, Booth smashed the window and disarranged the display. He was arrested and fined and left town. 2 years later, Booth assassinated President Lincoln. My father was known as a venerable practitioner and jovial citizen, and was former president of the village of Portland. He was also trustee for 18 years. He was a member of the school board since the memory of the earliest resident. He made hundreds of house calls to deliver babies and tend to the sick and dying. I enjoyed growing up in Portland. The Opera House next door was built the same year as our building. All of the high school graduations were held there, as well as musicals, plays, vaudeville acts, and other entertainment. My sister Helen and I were very popular as we sang duets there and for weddings and funerals. Kent Street was paved with bricks in 1909, and we had sidewalks. All of the business owners downtown were like family. We enjoyed many downtown events, including homecoming parades. I chose not to marry and helped at home as well as with my father's medical practice. 1913 was a time period when our family experienced financial problems trying to help one of my brothers who was a physician out of state, but he was also a scoundrel. And he was arrested several times, including in 1913. You'll see by the picture, I was also working part-time in 1913 to help out at Fonzie's. Here I am. So my father sold his ownership of the building in 1913 and moved his practice home over the holidays. He continued to practice medicine until his death in December 1916. Portland is growing, and yet today, in October 1917, the times are hard. The Great War, also known as World War I, is still raging in Europe. The death of Father 10 months ago and the death of our mother last month has resulted in the decision by my two sisters and me to sell the family home and pasture to Dr. Alton. This evening, my oldest sister Helen and I will be boarding the train and moving to Ann Arbor to live. Today is the last day that I will reside in Portland until 1952, when I will be brought back for burial in Portland Cemetery with all my family except the two brothers who live out of state. As for the rest of this building's story, in 1922, Sulpicio sold the business to Santino Guidi, and the store acquired the name Candyland. Gene's restaurant occupied the space during the 1950s and expanded to own both storefronts by 1967. At some point in time, the northern half of the Opera Block building was acquired, and two building owners have owned the Opera House since that time. We are hoping that the original storefront is eventually restored. Thank you for coming today.
Okay.
Welcome to Portland's fourth annual historic walk. I have to say that things have changed much since
Rush, I'm gonna leave this stuff here for just a minute. Let's see if I can help you clean up. Be right back.
Oh yeah, don't worry about it.
Welcome to Portland's fourth annual historic walk. I have to say that things have changed much since I walked the streets. It's easy to get distracted with cars and TV and what is it, social media? I'm no angel at all, but I know how to dress the proper lady. even if I did do a little work in the red light business, that's a story for another time. This story is about Portland. Let me introduce myself. My name is Terry Brown. My friends call me Trixie, or Trix for short. You've heard of my cousin, I'm sure, the ghost of Christmas past. I'm the ghost of Portland's past. My own self and the other kind souls you'll be meeting today are in partnership with the Portland Area Historical Society and Portland's Main Street. We hope to tell you stories that will let you know where we've been as well as how we came to be here today. So I'd like you to thank everybody there. They've been putting in a tremendous amount of work. Thank you very much. Back in the day, that would be 1830 or so, Europeans began to realize the Native Americans had already known for years that this was a great place to live. The first wood that we know of was Philo Vogue and his son William, who set up a trading post which they made permanent by acquiring land to stay in this area. And that was set up on the Wabanah River, which is the looking glass to you, right where it empties into the ground. Well, you know the saying, build it and they will come. Well, I love movies, don't you? They're so great. But anyway, where was I? Oh yes, Elijah Newman soon followed Philo Vogue and filed for extensive federal land grants to get the land that was so fertile around the confluence of the two rivers. After that, the pioneers flooded into Michigan and began to do the timber. They dammed the rivers. Portland became a mill town. So they planted crops, built churches and businesses, and built what was a settlement into a community. In 1869, the village of Portland was incorporated. And at that same time, the railroads came through, bringing another second wave of entrepreneurs, including bankers, lawyers, physicians, and other professionals, some of my clients, for money, drugs, and intrigue. We hope that you will enjoy meeting some of these folks today. Now, although a few of the buildings were built of brick, the majority of them along Penn Street were made from the material that was most readily available, that was wood. In 1877, disaster struck, and a fire broke out, destroying most of the buildings along one side, scorching and damaging a lot of the buildings on the other side. Disaster though it may be, it created opportunities and employment in the form of a boom for building, creating brick and stone beauties that you see here today. Of all the buildings, most of them are still standing other than the Divine Hotel, which was torn down in 1979. Moving forward, it appears that there was some agreement, lesson learned, that wood was no longer going to be used, so further building continued in brick. So imagine what it was like. It was 3 years going from walking down the clapboard sidewalk, looking at the wooden structures above, to solid brick and stone. It had to be incredibly amazing for the folks that lived here. Change is ever constant, isn't it? For instance, back before Highway 96 was built, Grand River Avenue was the main thoroughfare between Detroit, Lansing, and Grand Rapids. Many of my clients came through that way, I can tell you. But, alas, the highway systems were just one of the many ways that contributed over the next 100 years to the decline of small towns, including Portland. But remember, I did say change was ever constant. So since the 1970s, the community has worked hard to rebuild not just the sector along Grand River, but we reclaimed Kent Street as a historic district, salvaged 4 historic bridges over our 2 rivers, built extensive parks, and 9 miles of pedestrian river trail system which attract people from all over the state and perhaps the country, including people from Detroit, which I can say were some of my clients. Again, I bring business to town. They told me that they came to ride their bicycles, can you believe, on 2 wheels, not 3, along the trail system. Now, as a ghost, I do have a few limitations, and so my time with you is about done. A few kind souls will be working with you from here, telling you tales and acting as your guides. I know that you will enjoy meeting Mr. Duncan Kennedy, who owns the very store within which we stand. Charles Maynard, the bank on the corner. Dr. Charles Delabau's daughter, Jenny, will tell the story of their family. And Dr. Lynette Powers. The name Powers may sound familiar to you. There is a park here named after them. With the exception of Mr. Kennedy, they will be holding signs so that you can see them for the folks who are anxiously waiting your arrival. They will take you along to introduce you. Cars, they're so magnificent, aren't they? But they do prove problematic when moving and bumped into, so we are going to ask that you break into small groups and follow your guides along the route that we have established. Afterwards, we invite you all to return here where we'll answer questions, have handouts with information about the people and the businesses that you will hear about today. Free cider and donuts and more titillating libations, if you like, are available here as well. We ask for your patience as we now break into groups and set you up with your guides for the tour. Thank you.
So please come back and enjoy yourselves. We ask for your patience now as we begin to break you into groups, and we wish you and your friends a wonderful day. Thank you so much for coming to Duncan Kennedy's hardware store.
You're on. Oh wait, no, they're gonna break in.
First I remember Curtis was in the other.
Oh, there, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm on the board of this bank, and we lived upstairs for several years, 3 years, I think. That was kind of,
Yeah, that's kind of cool. The upstairs,
oh, I know, last time I was up there, it was wreckage kind of.
basically,
Storage, yeah.
It needs to be, we're thinking, maybe the Sunny Bridge is
We
thinking,
what?
buying it.
And who's thinking of it?
It's the Sunny Bridge.
What?
Sunny Bridge, preschool and daycare.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah.
We might turn those into loft apartments.
Yeah. Well, I could give you a recommendation. It's a fun place to live, you know.
Yeah,
It really is.
yeah.
The first night we lived up there, we turned off the lights and it didn't get any darker in there. The street light out,
Oh, yeah.
out next to the corner.
Yeah. Well, I lived in the Weber Mansion. I lived in the Weber Mansion.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, you had a little better than we did because we lived upstairs over at the corner store, really,
Yeah.
which was that side of this building.
Yeah.
Oh, that's nice. And, I was tempted to buy that one time, and we decided to either buy that or build a house, and we built a house. We're still in it.
Oh, but the Weber Mansion is just beautiful inside.
Oh, you don't have to sell me. No, I'm not thinking of the Weber. I'm thinking of the Maynard.
Maynard Mansion.
Maynard was the one, yeah.
Yeah.
Weber was for sale too, I think, but.
Oh, yeah.
But we were looking at tremendous heating bills at the time, and
Oh,
of course
yeah.
we were newlywed, you know.